This plot shows a percentage of boys and girls who achieve educational benchmarks in each of the assessments during compulsory schooling. Gaps between boys and girls are colour-coded, so we indicate a female advantage in red or a male advantage in blue. So as you can probably see from this plot, other than in mathematics at Key Stage 2, girls are more likely to achieve educational benchmarks at each assessment from the foundation stage profile all the way through to GCSE results. Right, thank you very much. So yes, my name is Claire Oakley. I'm a researcher at the University of Essex, and my particular area of interest is underachievement in education. So I don't specifically concentrate on boys, but obviously boys do come into my area of interest. I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes walking you through some insights from a study called the Millennium Cohort study on the comparative achievement of boys and girls, and that from foundation stage through to GCSE outcomes. So what is the Millennium Cohort study? I'm going to start there and then go on to outline the comparative achievement differences and how gaps between boys and girls change during compulsory education. I'm going to talk very briefly about post-16 education, although that's not particularly a focus of my research, partly because the Millennium Cohort, I don't have data as to what happened and where they went after 16. I'm going to talk a little about the contribution of special educational needs to boys' underachievement, and then outline some brief recommendations based on what we know so far. So the Millennium Cohort study is a large sample of children who were born actually across the UK during the Millennium school year, so 2000-2001. Children were recruited about 9 months old, and then they were regularly surveyed after that point. It's a diverse cohort, so there is intentional oversampling of children from disadvantaged backgrounds and from ethnic minority groups. So it allows researchers to investigate the impact of disadvantage on a number of outcomes, but also including educational outcomes. So it's a broad set of data covering attitudes, development, and the environment that they grow up with. For a subset of the cohort, we also have access to their school achievement data from the National Pupil Database, which covers children from England and Wales. So I'm working with a sample of around 5,000 boys and girls who entered mainstream education and actually have largely completed it now, since they'll be around 23 years old at this point. So this plot shows a percentage of boys and girls who achieve educational benchmarks in each of the assessments during compulsory schooling. Gaps between boys and girls are colour-coded, so we indicate a female advantage in red or a male advantage in blue. So as you can probably see from this plot, other than in mathematics at Key Stage 2, girls are more likely to achieve educational benchmarks at each assessment from the foundation stage profile all the way through to GCSE results. What is also notable about these plots is that the female advantages are actually reducing over time during primary school. So we see gaps sort of shrinking up until Key Stage 2 and then widening again during adolescence. And that's happening in both English or language achievement and mathematics. So we're seeing some wider gaps being reduced and then widening up again later on. Sciences take a similar pattern to mathematics as well, although it's a little more complex to put on a plot because of the fact that we at GCSE split our sciences into 3 single sciences or a combined science qualification, so that makes it slightly complicated. But the general pattern of achievement is very similar. So again, girls are more likely to achieve benchmarks in Key Stage 1 and GCSE, and boys are more likely to achieve benchmarks at Key Stage 2. Differences are smaller in the individual sciences, and actually in terms of achieving the benchmark, there's equity in biology and physics at GCSE. In terms of overall GCSE outcomes, around 9% more girls are achieving the overall benchmark of 5 or more GCSE passes, including mathematics and English. And that's obviously a key indicator of going to university in the future. And across most of the subjects at GCSE, girls are actually achieving a larger share of the top grades. And it's only in mathematics and physics that girls are not achieving that. So we basically do have girls getting higher grades at GCSE and boys substantially underachieving compared to girls, and being more grouped down the lower end. So summarising all that, because there's a lot of information covered quite quickly there, girls are more likely to achieve better results in English, reading and writing throughout their education, and more boys are achieving lower grades or levels, and more girls are achieving benchmarks or achieving top grades. Patterns differ in mathematics and sciences, and the gaps between boys and girls there are less stable as children progress through primary and secondary education. There's a general trend of reducing gender gaps in primary school, and that's not particularly well known, I think, but also this other trend of increasing gender gaps in secondary school. And again, this is not necessarily well recognised. So we're seeing a pattern of reversing or reducing existing female advantages in primary school. Girls are starting and doing better in early education. Boys are doing some sort of level of catching up, if you like, or closing those gaps. And then, unfortunately, gaps are widening again as we start to focus on the future. And finally, I can't really progress without mentioning the general pattern of underachievement of pupils with special educational needs. Obviously, this disproportionately affects boys because of the fact that boys are more likely to be diagnosed with a special educational need. So what is the contribution of special educational needs to male achievement? Well, the Department for Education reports that about 16 to 21% of pupils have an identified special educational need, and this equates to around 15% of boys in the cohort and 10% of girls. Pupils with special educational needs make up the majority of those who fail to achieve benchmarks or fail to make expected progress, although there are also a substantial number of pupils without additional needs who are also failing. The high prevalence of SEND diagnoses among boys is therefore contributing to gender gaps, particularly in language achievement, but it also seems to blur gender differences in mathematics and other STEM subjects. Among the pupil without additional needs, we find that achievement more closely aligns to gender stereotypes, that boys are more able in STEM subjects and girls are more able in language subjects. But the overall patterns of change remain. There's still this sort of boys catching up in primary and then falling further behind in secondary, going on. So the underperformance of STEM pupils does contribute to gender gaps, but it certainly doesn't fully explain them, and there is more to look at here as well. What happens after GCSE results? Well, we have fewer boys we've already mentioned this, we have fewer boys taking A-levels and going to university, and achievement of boys is lower in both of these. Apprenticeship numbers are relatively similar, but there's quite marked differences in the choices that boys and girls are making once they enter apprenticeships, and these are very much being entered along stereotypical lines. At age 13 to 14, in the Millennium Cohort study, boys are reporting that they're less likely to be planning to stay in education or attend university than girls. And this is consistent across ethnic groups and family income groups. So this seems to be a general view, and one that should be a little concerning, really. It's also that parent views are actually similar. So parents of girls are more likely to think that their daughters will go to university than parents of boys. And the difference is particularly large, a large difference between the parents of pupils with special educational needs. We also know that high educational expectation supports the achievements of boys, girls, and pupils with additional needs. So ensuring that educational expectations are high but achievable, and that parents and teachers and pupils are aligned, may be an important support for the educational achievements of these different groups. So what are the recommendations from this, briefly? I feel like I've gone very quickly through an entire area here. The evidence supports the efficacy of high quality preschool teaching in supporting later educational achievement. So it is an effective intervention for boys, girls, and disadvantaged children. Home-based pre-literacy activities are equally effective, but preschool provision can provide an important support where this is not practical at home. This area remains a critical focus for closing early achievement gaps. In particular, there's a need to increase boys' reading for pleasure. We're also recommending that teacher education and training specifically targets awareness of issues such as unconscious bias and stereotypes, which are thought to influence children's educational trajectories and achievement. For example, analysis of the Millennium Cohort finds evidence of teacher biases in judgments of their children's ability in mathematics and reading, according to gender and additional need and family income stereotypes, with children being both over or under-assessed according to their characteristics. So we recommend directing resources towards enabling teachers to recognise and challenge the existence and effects of stereotyping. Children perceive stereotypes from the media, any adult with whom they come into contact, but also from their peers, and teachers may have a role to play in addressing some of the societal stereotypes that prevail here. We also recommend that teachers' professional development includes education on child developmental differences, including neurodiversity. This is something that teachers themselves have raised in the OECD's TALIS survey, which is a survey, international survey of teachers, in the need to try and address, to meet the needs of all pupils. And finally, recommending active and early school engagement with families on educational expectations and post-16 options. Most often, this is not actually a direct discussion with parents, and yet parents have a strong influence on the choices that children make, both at school and in the future. And I can't switch to the last page, but thank you very much for listening.